The sun hadn't yet broken the horizon when Lieutenant Sarah Chun received the call that would define her military career. The secure satellite phone buzzed insistently in the pre-dawn darkness of the forward operating base in Afghanistan's Khyber province. She rolled out of her narrow cot, her body automatically shifting into the alert state that had kept her alive through 3 combat deployments. "Chun here," she answered, her voice steady despite being pulled from deep sleep. "Lieutenant, we need you in the briefing tent." "Priority Alpha," came the crisp voice of Major Richards, the base commander. The line went dead. Sarah had been expecting this call for weeks. Intelligence reports had been flooding in about a high-value target operating in the remote mountain valleys that bordered Pakistan. Ahmad Nazir, a bomb maker whose explosive devices had killed dozens of coalition forces and hundreds of Afghan civilians, had finally made a mistake. Signal intelligence had pinpointed his location to a compound 30 kilometers northeast of their position. She dressed quickly in the dim light, pulling on her desert camouflage uniform with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Her fingers automatically checked each piece of equipment as she prepared herself. Radio, medical kit, ammunition, water. Each item had its place, each serving a purpose that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophe. The briefing tent hummed with activity when she arrived. Maps covered every available surface, marked with red circles, blue arrows, and yellow highlighted routes. Drone footage played on multiple screens, showing aerial views of the target compound. Major Richards stood at the center of it all, his weathered face serious as he studied the intelligence reports. "Gentlemen, Lieutenant Chun," he began as she took her place among the assembled special operations personnel. "We have a window. Nazir is confirmed at this location." He pointed to a cluster of buildings nestled in a narrow valley. Latest count puts his security detail at approximately 15 to 20 fighters, all well-armed and experienced. Sarah studied the satellite imagery with practiced eyes. The compound sat at the end of a winding dirt road, surrounded by steep terrain that offered both natural defenses and potential escape routes. Multiple buildings provided cover and concealment, while the single-access road created a natural choke point that could work for or against them. "The mission parameters are straightforward," Major Richards continued. "Capture or eliminate Nazir. Secondary objective is to secure any intelligence materials, particularly his bomb-making manuals and contact information. Rules of engagement are weapons-free once we confirm hostile intent." A Navy SEAL commander named Thompson spoke up from the back of the tent. Sarah had worked with his team before, and she knew him to be competent but traditional in his tactical thinking. "Sir, we're looking at a complex target in difficult terrain. My team can handle this, but we'll need substantial backup and air support. I'm thinking a full platoon-sized element with rotary wing on standby." Major Richards nodded thoughtfully. "What are you thinking for timeline, Commander?" 48 to 72 hours minimum for proper planning and positioning. This isn't the kind of target you rush into without detailed preparation. We need full intelligence workup, multiple contingency plans, and coordination with local Afghan forces. Sarah found herself studying the imagery more closely. Something about the compound's layout nagged at her tactical instincts. The way the buildings were positioned, the sight lines, the natural terrain features. She had spent years studying close-quarters combat scenarios, and this particular setup reminded her of training exercises she had run countless times. "Lieutenant Chun," Major Richards said, noticing her intense focus on the maps. "You've been tracking Nazir longer than anyone here. What's your assessment?" All eyes turned to her. Sarah felt the weight of their attention, but kept her voice level and professional. "Sir, the compound layout suggests they're using standard defensive protocols. Multiple buildings allow for layered defense, but they also create blind spots and natural funnels for an attacking force." Thompson shifted uncomfortably. "With respect, Lieutenant, this isn't a training exercise. We're talking about hardened fighters who know the terrain and have nothing to lose. This requires careful planning and overwhelming force. Sarah nodded respectfully, but continued her analysis. Understood, sir. But there's something else. The signal intelligence suggests they're expecting a large-scale assault. They've been repositioning heavy weapons and calling in reinforcements. If we give them 72 hours to prepare, we might be walking into a much larger fight. She pointed to specific locations on the satellite imagery. These positions here and here show signs of recent digging, probably prepared fighting positions or weapons caches. Every hour we delay gives them more time to fortify. Major Richards leaned forward, interested. What would you recommend? A small, fast-moving element could potentially get inside their decision loop. Hit them before they're fully prepared, use speed and surprise to offset their numerical advantage. Thompson's expression hardened. Lieutenant, that's exactly the kind of cowboy thinking that gets people killed. Special operations require methodical planning, not Hollywood heroics. The tension in the tent was palpable. Sarah understood Thompson's position. He was responsible for his men's lives, and conservative tactics saved lives. But her instincts told her that conventional approaches wouldn't work against this particular target. I'm not suggesting anything reckless, she replied calmly. But consider this. Nazir isn't just another fighter. He's a bomb maker, which means he thinks in terms of triggers and timing. He's probably already calculating how long it will take us to mount a conventional assault and preparing accordingly. Major Richards studied both officers carefully. The decision would ultimately be his, and Sarah could see him weighing the competing tactical philosophies. Conservative and methodical versus fast and aggressive. Both had their merits, and both had their risks. How long would you need for a rapid assault? He asked Sarah. 6 hours for final reconnaissance and positioning. We could launch at sunset tonight. Thompson shook his head firmly. Sir, I strongly advise against this approach. My team has handled dozens of these missions. We know what works. And what if Nazir slips away while we're planning? Sarah countered. Intelligence suggests he moves locations every few days. This might be our only chance. The debate continued for another 30 minutes, with various team leaders weighing in on both sides. Some supported Thompson's methodical approach. Others found merit in Sarah's aggressive timeline. Maps were consulted, intelligence reports reviewed, and risk assessments conducted. Finally, Major Richards called for quiet. Here's my decision. Commander Thompson, I want you to begin preparations for a conventional assault as backup. Lieutenant Shun, I'm authorizing a small reconnaissance element to get closer and assess the situation. If conditions are favorable, you have permission to attempt rapid infiltration and assessment. It wasn't exactly what either officer had requested, but it represented a compromise that acknowledged both tactical approaches. Sarah felt a mixture of anticipation and responsibility settling on her shoulders. The reconnaissance mission would be dangerous, but it might provide the intelligence needed to make the operation successful. Rules of engagement? She asked. Observe and report unless directly threatened. If you encounter hostile forces, you are authorized to defend yourself and complete the mission if opportunity presents itself. Thompson stepped forward. Sir, I want to go on record stating my opposition to this approach. Small unit operations in hostile territory without backup are inherently risky. Noted, Commander. But sometimes calculated risks are necessary. Major Richards turned back to Sarah. Lieutenant, select your team. Maximum 4 personnel, including yourself. I want her best people. Sarah's mind immediately went to her usual team. Sergeant Martinez, a sniper with supernatural accuracy and the patience of a monk. Corporal Jackson, a communications specialist who could maintain contact with base even in the worst terrain. Staff Sergeant Kumar, a medic and explosives expert whose calm demeanor under pressure had saved lives on multiple occasions. I'll need full kit authorization, she said. Suppressed weapons, night vision, climbing gear, and emergency extraction capability. Approved. What's your planned approach route? Sarah moved to the large-scale map and traced a path with her finger. We'll insert here, approximately 8 kilometers south of the target. Move on foot through this valley system to avoid the main access road. Final approach from the eastern ridgeline gives us the best observation positions and multiple escape routes. The plan was taking shape, but Sarah knew that no plan survived contact with the enemy unchanged. Her team would need to be flexible, adaptive, and prepared for anything. The next several hours will be spent in detailed preparation, checking equipment, studying maps, and rehearsing contingency procedures. As the briefing broke up, Thompson approached her privately. His expression was stern but not unfriendly. "Lieutenant, I hope you understand that my concerns come from experience. I've seen too many good soldiers die because someone thought they could outsmart the enemy with clever tactics." Sarah nodded respectfully. "I understand, sir. But I've also seen opportunities lost because we were too cautious. Sometimes the enemy's expectations can be turned against them." "Maybe so. Just remember that getting your people home alive is more important than any single mission." It was good advice, and Sarah took it to heart as she headed back to her quarters to prepare. The next few hours would be crucial, not just for mission planning, but for mental preparation. She needed to be focused, calm, and ready for anything. Her team was waiting when she arrived at their designated equipment area. Martinez was already field stripping his sniper rifle, checking each component with a methodical precision that made him so effective. Jackson had communication equipment spread across a table, testing frequencies and backup systems. Kumar was organizing medical supplies and checking their explosive identification equipment. "Gentlemen, we have a mission," she began, and proceeded to brief them on the situation. Each man listened intently, asking relevant questions and making suggestions based on their specialized knowledge. "Timeline's tight," Martinez observed, "but doable if the weather holds. Communications might be spotty in those mountains," Jackson added. "I'll pack extra batteries and redundant systems." Kumar nodded thoughtfully. "If we're going in light and fast, medical supplies will be limited. We'll need to be extra careful about avoiding unnecessary risks." They spent the afternoon in intensive preparation. Equipment was checked and double-checked. Maps were memorized. Contingency plans were developed for every conceivable scenario. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, Sarah felt the familiar pre-mission calm settling over her team. The helicopter insertion went smoothly, with the aircraft touching down just long enough for the 4-person team to disembark before lifting off again into the darkening sky. They were alone now in hostile territory, with only their training, equipment, and each other for support. The 8-kilometer approach march took them through terrain that varied from rocky desert to steep mountain slopes. They moved carefully, using night vision equipment to navigate while avoiding any signs of enemy presence. Radio check-ins with base confirmed that their communications were working, though the signal quality would probably degrade as they moved deeper into the mountains. By midnight, they had reached their initial observation position on the eastern ridgeline, overlooking the target compound. What they saw through their scopes would change everything they thought they knew about the mission. The compound was much more heavily defended than intelligence had suggested. Patrol patterns indicated at least 30 fighters, not the 15 to 20 originally estimated. Heavy weapons positions were clearly visible, including what appeared to be a mounted machine gun covering the main approach route. But there was something else. The way the defenders were positioned, their patrol routes, their apparent state of readiness. It all suggested they were expecting an attack. Not just any attack, but specifically a large-scale assault from the main access road. Sarah studied the scene through her scope while Martinez provided running commentary on what he observed from his position. Multiple fighting positions on the northern and western approaches. Heavy concentration of personnel around the main building. But look at the eastern side. Minimal security, almost like they're not expecting anyone to come from our direction. It was exactly what she had suspected during the briefing. The enemy was prepared for a conventional assault, but might be vulnerable to an unexpected approach from an unlikely direction. The question was whether her small team could exploit that vulnerability effectively. She checked her watch. 3 hours until dawn. If they were going to act, it would have to be soon. The approaching daylight would eliminate their advantages of stealth and surprise while exposing them to overwhelming enemy fire. "Base, this is Recon 1, she whispered into her radio. "We have eyes on target. Situation is more complex than anticipated." "Copy, Recon 1. What's your assessment?" Sarah looked at her team, saw the readiness in their eyes, and made a decision that would echo through military tactical doctrine for years to come. "Base, requesting permission to proceed with direct action. We have a potential opportunity, but the window is closing fast." The static crackled through Sarah's earpiece as Major Richards weighed her request. She could almost feel the tension in the base's command center 30 kilometers away, where senior officers were probably debating the wisdom of authorizing a 4-person assault against a fortified compound defended by 30 fighters. "Recon 1, explain your assessment. What opportunity are you seeing?" Sarah adjusted her position behind the rocky outcrop, keeping her voice low as she responded. "The enemy has positioned for a conventional ground assault from the west and north. Eastern approach is lightly defended. We count 6 guards maximum on this side, compared to over 20 on the primary approaches." Martinez shifted beside her, his sniper scope trained on the compound's eastern perimeter. "The building layout creates natural dead zones," he whispered. "If we can get inside the outer perimeter, the defenders can't bring their heavy weapons to bear without risking friendly fire." Kumar, monitoring their rear security, added his assessment. "Medical evacuation would be nearly impossible if this goes wrong. We'd be committed with no backup." Jackson's voice came through their team radio net. "Base communications are solid, but if we move into the compound, I'll lose signal strength significantly." Sarah processed all the information while keeping her eyes on the target. The tactical situation was clear in her mind. The enemy had prepared for the wrong kind of attack, creating an exploitable weakness. But exploiting it would require her team to act well beyond their original reconnaissance mandate. "Base, the target building shows signs of recent activity. Lights, movement patterns suggest high-value personnel are present. This might be our only chance to get Nazir before he relocates." Another pause. Sarah knew that somewhere in that command center, Commander Thompson was probably arguing against authorizing the assault. His concerns were legitimate. Small unit operations against superior numbers rarely ended well. But sometimes warfare required accepting calculated risks to achieve strategic objectives. "Recon 1, what's your proposed course of action?" Sarah had been refining the plan in her head since they'd first observed the compound. "Approach from the eastern ridge using natural terrain for concealment. Neutralize perimeter security silently. Breach the main building and secure or eliminate the target. Extract via the same route before enemy reinforcements can respond. Timeline, 30 minutes maximum inside the compound. Dawn is in 3 hours. We need to be clear and moving toward extraction before first light." The radio fell silent again. Sarah could imagine the debate raging in the command center. Risk versus opportunity. Conservative tactics versus aggressive action. The kind of decisions that define military careers and sometimes change the course of conflicts. Martinez spoke quietly beside her. "Movement in the main building. Second floor, northwest corner. Could be our target." Sarah shifted her scope to the indicated window. Through the green haze of night vision, she could see a figure moving around what appeared to be a workshop area. Tables covered with equipment, walls lined with materials that could be explosive precursors. If Nazir was in that room, they were looking at the bomb-making laboratory that had produced devices killing coalition forces across the region. "Base, we have possible target identification. Individual matching Nazir's profile in what appears to be a workshop environment. Can you confirm identity?" "Negative. Range and lighting conditions make positive identification impossible from current position." "Recon 1, you're authorized to proceed with direct action. Rules of engagement are weapons-free once you commit to assault. Priority is capture of high-value target, but Elimination is authorized if capture is not feasible. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied the transition from planning to action. Copy base. Beginning approach in 5 minutes. She turned to her team, seeing the mix of determination and apprehension in their faces. Each man understood the risks they were accepting. Martinez, you'll provide overwatch from this position. Jackson, you're our link to base until we're inside the compound. Then, maintain security on our exit route. Kumar, you're with me for the actual breach. Rules of engagement? Kumar asked. Silent elimination until we're compromised, then whatever's necessary to complete the mission and get out alive. They spent the next few minutes checking equipment one final time. Suppressors were attached to weapons. Night vision devices were tested. Emergency signaling devices were confirmed operational. Each man understood his role and the contingency procedures if things went wrong. The descent from the ridge took 20 minutes, moving carefully through loose rock and sparse vegetation. Sarah led, with Kumar following at 10-meter intervals. They used hand signals to communicate, maintaining absolute silence as they approached the compound's perimeter. The eastern fence was chain-link topped with concertina wire, probably installed more to keep local villagers out than to stop a determined military assault. Sarah had bolt cutters in her kit, but cutting the fence would leave obvious evidence of their presence. Instead, she identified a spot where the fence had been damaged, possibly by rock slides or weather, creating a gap just large enough for a person to squeeze through. The first guard post was 50 meters inside the perimeter, positioned to watch the main approach road. Sarah could see the sentry through her scope, a young man, probably in his 20s, carrying an AK-47 and smoking a cigarette. His attention was focused outward, watching for threats from the expected direction of attack. Sarah signaled Kumar to wait while she moved into position. The approach required crossing 30 meters of open ground, using shadows and the natural terrain for concealment. Each step was calculated, each movement designed to avoid creating any sound that might alert the sentry. When she was within striking distance, Sarah paused to observe the guard's pattern. He was walking a predictable route between two positions, taking approximately 90 seconds to complete each circuit. On his next turn away from her position, she moved. The elimination was swift and silent. Kumar appeared moments later to help drag the body into concealment behind a pile of building materials. They now had perhaps 10 minutes before the guard's absence would be noticed, depending on how frequently the sentries checked in with each other. The next guard position was more challenging. 2 fighters were stationed near the main building, positioned where they could observe multiple approaches. Sarah studied their behavior through her scope, noting their conversation patterns and the way they shared security duties. Base, this is Recon 1, she whispered into her radio. We're inside the perimeter. Beginning approach to primary objective. The response was faint but audible. Copy, Recon 1. Be advised, drone surveillance shows no change in enemy activity patterns. That was good news. It meant their presence hadn't been detected and the enemy was still operating under normal security conditions. But it also meant they were running on borrowed time. Sooner or later, someone would notice the missing sentry. Sarah and Kumar moved through the compound using buildings and vehicles for concealment. The layout was more complex than satellite imagery had suggested, with additional structures and obstacles that created both opportunities and challenges. Storage buildings, parked vehicles, and equipment areas provided cover, but also created potential hiding places for additional guards. They reached the main building without further contact. Up close, Sarah could confirm that the structure was being used as both a residence and workshop. Lights were visible on the second floor, and she could hear the faint sounds of activity from inside. The building had 2 primary entrances, a front door facing the compound's main area and a side door that appeared to lead to service areas. Sarah chose the side entrance, reasoning that it was less likely to be heavily guarded and would provide better access to the interior without alerting occupants. Kumar positioned himself to cover the side door, while Sarah prepared for entry. The door was unlocked, probably because the occupants felt secure within their defended compound. Sarah eased it open slowly, listening for any sounds that might indicate guards or booby traps. The interior was dark except for light filtering down from the upper floor. Sarah could hear voices speaking in Pashto, discussing technical details that she couldn't fully understand but that sounded like instructions or planning discussions. One voice had the authoritative tone of someone giving orders, possibly their target. The staircase was wooden and appeared sturdy enough to support their weight without creaking. Sarah led the way up, keeping her weapon ready and her night vision equipment active. Each step was tested before committing her full weight, each pause used to listen for changes in the conversation above. Halfway up the stairs, she could see light coming from under a door at the end of the hallway. The voices were clearer now, and she began to pick out individual words. Explosive, timer, target, the kind of terminology that confirmed they were in the right place. Kumar tapped her shoulder and pointed to another door that was slightly ajar. Inside, she could see what appeared to be sleeping quarters with several men resting. The discovery complicated their situation significantly. They weren't just dealing with guards and their target, but potentially with additional fighters who could be awakened by any disturbance. Sarah made a command decision. She signaled Kumar to watch the sleeping quarters while she approached the workshop door. Through the gap under the door, she could see shadows moving around what appeared to be a large table. The voices continued their technical discussion, occasionally punctuated by the sounds of tools being used. She positioned herself beside the door frame and slowly turned the handle. The door wasn't locked, but it stuck slightly, requiring careful pressure to open without making noise. As the gap widened, she could see inside the room that would define her military career. 3 men were gathered around a table covered with electronic components, timers, and what appeared to be explosive materials. One man, matching the physical description of Ahmad Nazir, was explaining something while pointing to a diagram spread on the table. The other 2 were taking notes and asking questions. Sarah had found not just her target, but evidence of an active bomb-making operation that posed an immediate threat to coalition forces and Afghan civilians. The decision tree was simple: capture or eliminate the threat before it could cause further damage. The room's layout worked in her favor. The 3 men were focused on their work and positioned with their backs to the door. Windows provided natural light, eliminating the need for her night vision equipment. Most importantly, the men were unarmed. Their weapons were leaning against the far wall, probably removed for comfort while working. Sarah stepped into the room, with Kumar behind her, both weapons trained on the 3 men. "Nobody move," she said in heavily accented Pashto, one of the few phrases she had memorized for situations like this. The reaction was immediate. The man she believed to be Nazir spun around, his eyes wide with shock and fear. One of the others started to move toward the weapons against the wall. The 3rd man's hand moved toward what might have been a hidden pistol. "Stop," Sarah commanded, switching to English since her Pashto was limited. The universal language of pointed weapons needed no translation. For a moment, the room was frozen in a tableau of confrontation. 3 bomb makers caught in the act, 2 American soldiers who had penetrated supposedly impregnable defenses. The next few seconds would determine whether this became a capture operation or something much more violent. Nazir spoke first, his English heavily accented but understandable. "You are American soldiers." "You are Ahmad Nazir," Sarah replied. It wasn't a question. "Yes." His voice was calm, resigned. "You have come very far to find me. Put your hands where I can see them. All of you." The 2 younger men looked to Nazir for guidance. Sarah could see the calculation in their eyes, the assessment of odds and opportunities. 3 against 2, but the Americans had the advantage of surprise and position weapons. "Do as she says," Nazir told his companions in Pashto, then switched back to English. "You want me alive, yes?" "For information." "That's the plan," Sarah confirmed, keeping her weapon trained on him while Kumar covered the other 2 men. What happened next would be remembered and analyzed in military academies for years to come. Nazir's hand moved toward the table, not aggressively, but slowly, as if reaching for something. Sarah's training screamed warnings. Bomb makers often kept dead man switches or panic devices close at hand. "Stop moving," she commanded. But Nazir's movement had triggered a response from one of his companions. The younger man lunged toward the weapons against the wall, gambling that he could reach them before the Americans could react. It was a fatal miscalculation. Kumar's suppressed weapon fired twice, the muffled shots dropping the man before he could reach his rifle. The sound of the body hitting the floor was louder than the gunshots themselves. The third man made his own desperate gambit, producing a pistol from somewhere inside his robes. Sarah's weapon spoke once, the bullet taking him center mass and spinning him away from the table. That left Nazir alone, his hands now raised in clear surrender, his eyes fixed on Sarah with a mixture of respect and resignation. "Very fast," he said quietly. "Very professional. Turn around. Hand behind your back." Kumar moved to secure the prisoner while Sarah kept her weapon trained on him. The flex cuffs went on efficiently, followed by a quick search for hidden weapons or devices. Nazir submitted to the process without resistance, perhaps understanding that his best chance for survival lay in cooperation. "Clear the room," Sarah ordered, and Kumar began the systematic process of photographing the workshop, collecting documents, and materials that might contain intelligence value. The bomb-making equipment, diagrams, and chemical precursors represented a treasure trove of information about enemy capabilities and planned operations. "Base, this is Recon 1, Sarah whispered into her radio. "Package secured. Beginning extraction." The response was immediate and relieved. "Outstanding, Recon 1. Extraction assets are moving to designated pickup point. Estimate 20 minutes to arrival. 20 minutes to get from the compound to the extraction point with a prisoner and potentially hostile forces in pursuit." Sarah checked her watch. They had been inside the building for 12 minutes, within their planned timeline, but probably approaching the point where their presence would be discovered. As if summoned by her concerns, Kumar held up a hand for silence. From somewhere below, they could hear voices calling out in Pashto. Someone had probably come looking for the guards they had eliminated. "Time to go," Sarah said. Kumar shouldered the capture materials while Sarah took responsibility for the prisoner. Nazir moved cooperatively, understanding that his survival depended on American protection once his own fighters realized what had happened. They reached the ground floor as shouts erupted from outside the building. Through the windows, Sarah could see lights moving around the compound as the enemy began to realize they had been infiltrated. The advantage of surprise was evaporating rapidly. "Back door," Kumar suggested, pointing toward their original entry point. But as they approached the rear of the building, automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple locations around the compound. The enemy had found the bodies of their missing sentries and was beginning a systematic search for the infiltrators. Sarah keyed her radio. "Base, we are compromised. Taking fire from multiple positions. Proceeding to extract under hostile conditions." The response was immediate. "Copy, Recon 1. Close air support is en route. Hold your position if possible." But holding their position wasn't an option. They were trapped inside a building surrounded by hostile forces who knew they were there. The only way out was through, and that meant fighting their way to the extraction point against overwhelming odds. Sarah looked at Kumar, saw the determination in his eyes, and made the decision that would create the legend. "We fight our way out." The first explosion rocked the building as enemy fighters began using grenades to flush out the intruders. Sarah felt the floor vibrate beneath her feet as chunks of plaster rained down from the ceiling. Through the windows, she could see muzzle flashes from at least 8 different positions as the compound's defenders converged on their location. "They're surrounding the building," Kumar reported, checking his ammunition supply. "Front, sides, probably the back too by now." Sarah's mind raced through tactical options. They were outnumbered at least 6-1, trapped in a building that was becoming less defensible by the second. Their only advantages were superior training, better equipment, and the element of confusion that came from the enemy not knowing exactly how many attackers they were dealing with. "Martinez, this is Chun," she spoke in her radio, hoping her sniper was still in position on the ridgeline. "I'm here." Watching the compound light up like Christmas. "Count at least 20 fighters moving toward your position. Can you provide suppressive fire on our exit route?" "Negative. Too many friendlies in the area now. I'd be shooting blind." That eliminated their Overwatch support. Jackson was maintaining communications from their planned rally point, too far away to provide direct assistance. Sarah and Kumar were truly alone, responsible for getting themselves and their prisoner out of an increasingly desperate situation. Another grenade exploded, this one closer to their position. The windows blew out, showering the room with glass fragments. Nazir flinched but remained calm, perhaps understanding that his American captors represented his best chance of survival in the chaos. "The back door," Kumar suggested again. "If we move fast, we might get through before they can coordinate their response." Sarah nodded, but as they moved toward the rear exit, automatic weapons fire erupted from that direction. Bullets punched through the door and walls, filling the air with splinters and dust. Someone had anticipated their escape route. "Front door," she decided. "Straight through the main concentration. They won't expect us to come at their strongest point." It was counterintuitive tactics, the kind of aggressive decision-making that separated special operations personnel from conventional forces. Instead of avoiding enemy strength, they would attack it directly, using speed and violence of action to overwhelm the opposition before it could respond effectively. Sarah checked her weapon and ammunition. 30 rounds in the current magazine, 2 more magazines in her gear. Kumar had similar loadout. Against 20 fighters, they would need to make every shot count. "On my signal," she whispered, moving to the front door. "We go out shooting. Stay close, keep moving, and don't stop until we reach the perimeter." Kumar positioned himself beside the door, ready to provide covering fire. Nazir stood between them, his eyes wide but his posture steady. For a bomb maker who had spent years avoiding capture, he was handling the situation with remarkable composure. Sarah counted to 3, then kicked the door open and stepped into the compound courtyard. The scene that greeted her was chaos lit by muzzle flashes and emergency lights. Armed men were running between buildings, shouting orders, and trying to establish security perimeters. Most were focused on the building she had just exited, creating a concentrated mass of targets in a relatively small area. Her first shot dropped a fighter who was running toward the building with an RPG launcher. The second and third shots eliminated 2 men who were trying to position a machine gun to cover the exits. Before the enemy could react to this new threat from an unexpected direction, she was moving across the courtyard with Kumar beside her and their prisoner between them. The key to the tactics Sarah employed was understanding human psychology under stress. The enemy fighters had been awakened from sleep or pulled from guard posts by reports of infiltrators. They were operating under conditions of confusion and incomplete information. When attackers suddenly appeared from the building they were trying to surround, the natural reaction was several seconds of cognitive dissonance while they processed this unexpected development. Those seconds were enough for Sarah and Kumar to cover half the distance to the compound's perimeter before organized resistance began to form. By then, they were moving targets in a complex environment, much harder to engage effectively than stationary opponents. A fighter appeared from behind a vehicle, raising his weapon. Sarah's shot took him in the chest before he could aim. Kumar engaged 2 targets simultaneously, his marksmanship training evident in the precision of his fire. They continued moving, using vehicles and structures for momentary cover while maintaining their momentum toward the fence. "RPG," Kumar shouted, pointing to their left where a fighter was loading a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. Sarah shifted her aim and fired 3 quick shots. The first missed, the second struck the launcher itself, the third dropped the operator. The RPG round detonated harmlessly against a storage building, the explosion adding to the general chaos but posing no immediate threat. They had covered 2/3 of the distance to the perimeter when the enemy began to coordinate their response. Fighters who had been moving individually started working in pairs and small groups. Machine gun fire began to sweep across the courtyard in organized patterns rather than random bursts. "Baiklas," Sarah commanded, pointing to a cluster of pickup trucks parked near the compound's motor pool. They dove behind the trucks as concentrated fire raked their previous position. Bullets sparked off metal and shattered glass, but the vehicles provided sufficient cover for them to catch their breath and assess the situation. "Count," Kumar asked, checking his ammunition. "8 down, maybe 10, Sarah replied. Still at least a dozen active. Through the gap between vehicles, she could see fighters attempting to flank their position. Others were establishing overwatch positions on rooftops and upper floors. The enemy was recovering from their initial surprise and beginning to fight more effectively. "They're boxing us in," Kumar observed. "Another minute, and we'll be completely surrounded." Sarah looked at their prisoner. Nazir was breathing heavily, but showed no signs of panic. If anything, he seemed to be studying their tactics with professional interest. "Why don't they just rush us?" she asked him directly. "Because you fight like devils," he replied in English. "They fear you now." It was an interesting psychological insight. The enemy's hesitation was providing Sarah and Kumar with time they needed to plan their next move. But that hesitation wouldn't last indefinitely. Eventually, superior numbers would overcome tactical skill unless they could reach the extraction point. "Base, this is Recon 1, Sarah spoke into her radio. "We're pinned down in the compound. Need immediate close air support." "Negative, Recon 1. Air assets are still 15 minutes out. Can you hold position?" 15 minutes was an eternity in their current situation. Sarah estimated they had perhaps 5 minutes before the enemy completed their encirclement and began the final assault. They needed to move now while they still had options. "Kumar, when I start shooting, take the prisoner and run for the fence. Don't stop, don't look back. What about you? I'll provide covering fire and follow. But if I don't make it, get him out of here." Kumar started to protest, but Sarah cut him off. "That's an order." She prepared for what might be her final tactical action, checking her remaining ammunition and planning her movement route. The enemy had positioned themselves to cover the direct route to the fence, but there was another option. A maintenance building offered concealment for part of the distance, and beyond that lay the motor pool where additional vehicles could provide cover. Sarah took a deep breath, said a brief prayer, and stepped out from behind the trucks with her weapon firing. Her initial burst caught 3 fighters who had been advancing on their position. The psychological effect was immediate. Instead of closing in for the final assault, the enemy instinctively sought cover. This created the opening Kumar needed to move with the prisoner toward their objective. Sarah followed a zigzag pattern across the courtyard, using every available piece of cover while maintaining suppressive fire. Her marksmanship training served her well. Even while moving and under stress, her shots were finding their targets with deadly accuracy. A fighter emerged from a doorway with an assault rifle. Sarah's shot dropped him before he could fire. 2 more appeared on a rooftop. She eliminated both with quick, precise shots. Her reputation for marksmanship, earned through countless hours on training ranges, was now being validated under the most extreme conditions possible. Behind her, Kumar had reached the fence with Nazir. The hole they had used to enter the compound was still there, partially concealed by debris. But as Kumar began pushing the prisoner through the opening, machine gun fire erupted from a guard tower they had missed during their initial surveillance. Sarah turned toward the new threat, her weapon trained on the tower. The machine gunner was firing in long bursts, the heavy rounds chewing up the ground around Kumar and Nazir. At this range, with iron sights and a standard assault rifle, hitting a target in an elevated position required extraordinary skill. She steadied herself behind a concrete barrier, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger. The machine gun fell silent. "Go, go, go," she shouted, and Kumar disappeared through the fence with their prisoner. Sarah was alone now in a compound full of hostile fighters, with perhaps 50 meters of open ground between her position and safety. Enemy fire was intensifying as the remaining fighters realized their quarry was escaping. Bullets snapped past her head and struck the concrete around her position. She made her own run for the fence, firing as she moved to keep enemy heads down. Halfway across the open ground, her weapon ran dry. Without stopping, she performed a combat reload while continuing to move, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought would have been too slow. 20 meters from the fence, a fighter stepped in her path with an assault rifle already aimed in her direction. Time slowed as Sarah realized she wouldn't be able to bring her weapon to bear before he fired. Her tactical mind calculated odds and angles, finding no solution that didn't end with her death. The fighter's head exploded in a pink mist as Martinez's sniper rifle spoke from the distant ridgeline. Her guardian angel had found a shot after all, threading the needle between friendly and hostile positions to eliminate the threat at the crucial moment. Sarah dove through the fence opening as automatic weapons fire converged on her previous position. She rolled to her feet on the far side to find Kumar and Nazir waiting in the cover of a rock formation. Behind them, the compound was erupting in confusion as fighters tried to determine what had happened and how many Americans had been involved. "Status?" she asked Kumar. "Prisoner secure. No injuries." "You?" Sarah checked herself quickly. A few cuts from flying glass, some bruises from her dive through the fence, but nothing serious. "Good to go. Let's move." They began the long trek back toward their extraction point, moving as quickly as possible while maintaining security. Behind them, the compound continued to buzz with activity as the enemy tried to organize pursuit. But in the darkness and broken terrain, tracking a small, well-trained team would be nearly impossible. "Recon 1, this is base," came the voice through a radio. "Status report. Package secured. Moving to extraction. ETA 20 minutes. Outstanding work. Extraction assets are inbound." As they moved through the darkness towards safety, Sarah allowed herself a moment to reflect on what had just happened. Her team had penetrated a heavily defended compound, captured a high-value target, and fought their way out against overwhelming odds. The entire action had lasted less than 90 minutes, with the actual firefight consuming barely more than 90 seconds. But those 90 seconds had demonstrated something that would reshape how special operations were planned and executed. Sometimes the most audacious approach was also the most effective. Sometimes 4 highly trained professionals could accomplish what conventional wisdom said required a full platoon. Commander Thompson's conservative approach would have worked, but it would have taken days to plan and execute. By then, Nazir would have been gone, relocating to another bomb-making facility where he could continue producing devices that killed coalition forces and civilians. Instead, Sarah's aggressive tactics had eliminated a significant threat while capturing valuable intelligence. The documents and materials Kumar had collected from the workshop would lead to the disruption of an entire bomb-making network, potentially saving hundreds of lives. As they reached the extraction point and saw the helicopter's lights approaching, Sarah knew that this mission would define her career and influence special operations doctrine for years to come. She had proven that with proper training, equipment, and tactical thinking, small units could achieve objectives that previously required much larger forces. But more than tactical success, she had demonstrated something even more valuable: the power of decisive leadership under extreme pressure. When conventional wisdom said, "That's impossible," she had proven that sometimes the impossible was simply untested. The helicopter touched down in a whirlwind of dust and rotor wash. Sarah pushed Nazir toward the aircraft while Kumar provided security. As they lifted off into the pre-dawn darkness, she could see the compound in the distance, still glowing with lights and activity. In the helicopter's crew compartment, Nazir looked at her with something approaching professional respect. "You're not what I expected," he said over the engine noise. "What did you expect?" Americans always attack with many soldiers, many machines. You came with just your skills. The helicopter touched down at Forward Operating Base Chapman just as the first light of dawn broke over the mountains. Sarah felt the familiar mix of exhaustion and adrenaline that followed successful high-stakes operations. Her legs were unsteady as she stepped onto the landing pad, the aftermath of 90 seconds of intense combat finally catching up to her body. Major Richards was waiting with a full security detail and medical personnel. Ahmad Nazir was immediately transferred to a secure holding area where intelligence specialists would begin the lengthy process of extracting information about his network, methods, and planned operations. The capture documents and materials from his workshop were handed over to explosive ordnance disposal experts for analysis. "Lieutenant Shun," Major Richards said as Sarah walked toward the command center, "I need a full debrief, but first, are you and your team injured?" "Minor cuts and bruises, sir. Nothing requiring immediate medical attention." "Good, because what you just accomplished is going to generate a lot of attention. I've already received calls from higher headquarters wanting details about the operation." Sarah wasn't surprised. Successful small unit operations always attracted interest from senior commanders looking for lessons learned and best practices. But something in Major Richards' tone suggested this debriefing would be different from routine after-action reports. Kumar appeared at her shoulder, having just finished turning over the captured intelligence materials. "Command wants to see us individually," he reported. "Starting with you." The debriefing room was crowded with personnel Sarah didn't recognize. Besides Major Richards, there were officers from higher headquarters, intelligence specialists, and what appeared to be a recording technician. This was clearly more than a routine operational review. "Lieutenant, I want you to walk us through the entire operation from initial approach to extraction," Major Richards began. "Take your time and provide as much detail as possible." Sarah spent the next 2 hours reconstructing every aspect of the mission. The planning process, team selection, approach route, reconnaissance findings, the decision to proceed with direct action, and the tactical execution. The assembled officers asked detailed questions about decision-making processes, time estimates, and tactical procedures. Commander Thompson attended the latter part of the debriefing, listening intently as Sarah described the assault on the compound and the fighting withdrawal to the extraction point. His expression was professional but unreadable. "Lieutenant," Thompson said when she had finished her account, "I want to be clear that I disagree with the decision to proceed without proper backup and support. However, I also want to acknowledge that the results speak for themselves. Your team accomplished something remarkable." It was as close to an admission that he had been wrong as Sarah was likely to get. Thompson's conservative instincts had been proven incorrect in this specific case, though his general approach remained valid for most operations. "The preliminary assessment of capture materials suggests we've disrupted a significant portion of the enemy's bomb-making network in this region," one of the intelligence officers reported. "Documents include contact information, supply sources, and technical specifications that should lead to follow-on operations against related targets." Major Richards leaned forward in his chair. "Lieutenant, what would you say was the key factor that made this operation successful?" Sarah considered the question carefully. There were several possible answers: superior training, good intelligence, tactical surprise, individual marksmanship skills. But the real key had been something more fundamental. Decision-making speed, sir. The enemy prepared for a conventional assault using traditional timelines. By operating inside their decision loop, we maintain the initiative throughout the engagement. Explain that concept. Most military operations follow predictable patterns: intelligence gathering, planning, rehearsal, execution. The enemy understands these patterns and prepares accordingly. When you compress those timelines and eliminate unnecessary steps, you can achieve objectives that appear impossible using conventional approaches. One of the senior officers spoke up. "Are you suggesting that current special operations doctrine is too conservative?" "No, sir. I'm suggesting that doctrine should include options for rapid response when conditions are favorable. Most missions require careful planning and substantial support. But some situations call for immediate action to exploit fleeting opportunities. The debriefing continued for another hour, covering equipment performance, communication procedures, and recommendations for future operations. Sarah found herself defending not just her tactical decisions, but her entire approach to special operations warfare. When it was over, Major Richards asked her to remain behind. The room cleared except for the two of them and Commander Thompson, who seemed to have something he wanted to say. "Lieutenant," Thompson began, "I owe you an apology. My opposition to your plan was based on legitimate tactical concerns, but I failed to consider the full range of possibilities. Your success has forced me to reconsider some of my assumptions about small unit operations." "Thank you, sir. But I want to emphasize that this approach won't work for every mission. We succeeded because specific conditions favored aggressive tactics. If those conditions hadn't been present, your methodical approach would have been more appropriate." Thompson nodded appreciatively. That's the mark of a mature, tactical thinker. Understanding not just what worked, but why it worked and when it might not work. Major Richards spread a map on the table. "Because you've opened up some new possibilities. Intelligence has identified 3 more high-value targets in this region, all using similar security arrangements. Higher headquarters wants to know if your techniques can be replicated." Sarah studied the marked locations, considering the tactical challenges each would present. All were remote compounds with limited access routes and substantial defensive preparations. Under normal circumstances, each would require a full platoon and extensive support assets. "It's possible," she said finally, "but it would require forming teams specifically trained for this kind of operation. The margin for error is too small to risk with personnel who aren't completely prepared." "What kind of preparation?" "Advanced marksmanship training beyond current standards. Intensive close-quarters combat drills. Cross-training so every team member can perform multiple functions. And extensive practice operating with minimal support." Thompson leaned forward, interested despite his previous reservations. "How long would such training take?" 6 months minimum for experienced personnel. A year for soldiers without special operations background. Major Richards made notes on his pad. "I'm going to forward your recommendations through channels. There's clearly interest in developing this capability on a larger scale." Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself at the center of discussions that would reshape American special operations doctrine. Senior commanders wanted to understand how 4 soldiers had accomplished what conventional wisdom said required 40. Defense contractors wanted to study their equipment and techniques. Military academics wanted to analyze the tactical innovations. The story of the operation began to spread through military networks, often growing in the telling. Some versions had Sarah's team fighting off hundreds of enemy fighters. Others claimed they had captured multiple high-value targets. The truth was impressive enough without embellishment, but military legends had a life of their own. 3 months after the raid, Sarah received orders to report to Special Operations Command Headquarters in Tampa, Florida. She was being assigned to a new unit tasked with developing and testing advanced small unit tactics. The program had been created specifically to explore the concepts her mission had demonstrated. Commander Thompson, despite his initial skepticism, volunteered to join the program. His experience with conventional special operations methods would provide valuable balance to Sarah's more aggressive approach. Together, they would develop training protocols that incorporated both tactical philosophies. "I've been thinking about our debate before the mission," Thompson told her as they prepared for reassignment. "We were both right in different ways. Your approach worked for that specific situation. My approach would work for most situations. The art is knowing which method to apply when." Sarah agreed. Military tactics were never one-size-fits-all solutions. Successful commanders needed multiple tools and the wisdom to select the right one for each situation. The new unit began operations with 12 volunteers from various special operations backgrounds. Sarah found herself in the unusual position of being both student and instructor learning conventional methods while teaching the innovative techniques that had made her famous. The training program was intense and dangerous. Live-fire exercises pushed the boundaries of acceptable risk. Close-quarters combat drills were conducted in environments that replicated real-world conditions as closely as possible. Medical training included scenarios where team members might need to perform surgery in combat conditions. Not everyone completed the program. 2 volunteers requested transfer after concluding the risks were unacceptable. One was injured during a training exercise and required medical reassignment. But those who remained developed capabilities that exceeded anything previously achieved in American Special Operations. 6 months into the program, Sarah's unit received its first operational assignment. A terrorist leader responsible for attacks in 3 countries had been located in a remote compound in Somalia. Conventional assault would require substantial international coordination and weeks of preparation. By then, the target would likely be gone. Sarah studied the intelligence reports with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. This would be the first test of whether her techniques could be successfully replicated by other teams. Everything she had learned about small unit tactics would be put to the ultimate test. The mission brief was remarkably similar to the operation that had made her famous. Remote target, limited access routes, substantial defenses, high-value objective. But this time, she wouldn't be leading the assault. That responsibility belonged to Master Sergeant Williams, a veteran of multiple deployments who had embraced the new tactical concepts with enthusiasm. "What's your assessment?" Sarah asked Williams as they studied the target compound. "Doable but challenging. The terrain is more open than Afghanistan, which limits our approach options. But the enemy appears to be using standard defensive arrangements, which means they're vulnerable to the same tactics you used against Nasir." Sarah nodded. The success of aggressive small unit operations depended on enemies preparing for conventional threats. As word of these new techniques spread, adversaries would adapt their defensive measures accordingly. The tactical advantage was inherently temporary. Rules of engagement: capture preferred, elimination authorized. Same as your mission. But, with one addition, we're authorized to pursue follow-on targets based on intelligence gathered during the operation. That was a significant expansion of mission scope. Instead of a single raid, Williams' team might conduct a series of operations against an entire network. It represented the evolution of small unit tactics from tactical innovation to strategic capability. 2 days later, Sarah stood in the command center watching drone footage as Williams led his team toward their objective. The operation proceeded exactly as planned, demonstrating that the techniques developed during her mission could be successfully transferred to other teams. Williams and his team captured their primary target and 3 associates, along with intelligence materials that led to additional operations across East Africa. Within 6 weeks, they had disrupted an entire terrorist network using tactics that would have been considered impossible just months earlier. "Congratulations," Major Richards told Sarah over a secure video link. "You've created something that's going to change how we fight." But Sarah understood that innovation was only the beginning. The real challenge would be institutionalizing these capabilities across the broader military while maintaining their effectiveness. Success bred imitation, and imitation often led to the dilution of core principles. As she prepared for her next assignment, training a new generation of special operations officers, Sarah reflected on how far she had come from that pre-dawn briefing in Afghanistan. What had started as a tactical gamble had evolved into a strategic capability that was reshaping American military doctrine. The impossible had become possible, but keeping it possible would require constant innovation, rigorous training, and the wisdom to know when aggressive tactics were appropriate and when conventional methods remained superior. The legend was just beginning 5 years after that night in Afghanistan. Colonel Sarah Chun stood before an auditorium filled with military officers from 12 allied nations. The Symposium on Advanced Small Unit Operations had become an annual event, drawing participants from around the world who wanted to understand how 4 soldiers had accomplished what conventional wisdom said was impossible. The PowerPoint slide behind her showed a tactical diagram of the Nazir compound, with arrows indicating movement patterns and engagement sequences. She had presented this material hundreds of times, but the questions never got easier to answer. Colonel, what would you say to critics who argue that your tactics are too risky for routine operations? Asked a British major from the front row. Sarah had heard variations of this question countless times. I would agree with them, she replied. These techniques should never be routine. They require specific conditions, exceptional training, and careful risk assessment. The moment they become routine is the moment they become ineffective. A German colonel raised his hand. How do you maintain the element of surprise when these methods are now taught in military academies worldwide? It was an excellent question that went to the heart of tactical evolution. By constantly innovating, Sarah answered. The specific techniques we used against Nazir are already obsolete. Our adversaries have adapted their defensive measures to counter them. Success requires staying ahead of that adaptation cycle. The truth was more complex than she could explain in a public forum. The original small unit rapid assault concept had spawned dozens of variations, each adapted to specific environments and threats. Urban operations required different approaches than mountain warfare. Desert conditions called for tactics that wouldn't work in jungle environments. More importantly, the enemy had indeed adapted. Terrorist organizations now prepared for small unit infiltration as well as conventional assaults. What had once been an unexpected approach was now part of standard threat assessments. The tactical advantage had largely evaporated, replaced by the need for even more sophisticated methods. After the presentation, Sarah walked across the base to visit the Advanced Tactics Training Center that bore her name. The Chin Institute for Special Operations Innovation had become the military's primary laboratory for developing unconventional warfare techniques. Teams from around the world came to study, train, and experiment with concepts that pushed the boundaries of what small units could accomplish. Master Sergeant Williams, now the Institute's senior instructor, met her at the entrance. He had completed 17 operations using variations of the original tactics, with a success rate that had made him something of a legend in his own right. How's the new class progressing? Sarah asked as they walked through the facility. Good fundamentals, but they're struggling with the psychological aspects. Technical skills are easier to teach than the mindset required for this kind of warfare. Sarah nodded. That had always been the most difficult part of the training program. Teaching soldiers to perform complex tactical movements under stress was challenging, but achievable through repetition and practice. Teaching them to make split-second decisions under overwhelming pressure while maintaining moral and ethical standards required something deeper. They stopped at an observation window overlooking a training facility that replicated urban environments in extraordinary detail. Below, a 6-person team was conducting a simulated hostage rescue operation against a force of 24 opposing players. The scenario was designed to be nearly impossible using conventional tactics, forcing the trainees to develop innovative solutions. Third attempt for this team, Williams explained. First 2 tries ended in mission failure. They're learning that superior firepower isn't always the answer. Sarah watched as the team split into 3 pairs, each taking a different approach to the target building. It was a variation of the tactics she had used in Afghanistan, adapted for urban warfare and hostage situations. The fundamental principle remained the same. Use speed, surprise, and superior individual skills to overcome numerical disadvantages. Time, she asked. 90 seconds from initiation to completion. If they succeed, the sacred 90 seconds had become a benchmark for advanced operations. Not because that specific timeline was always optimal, but because it represented the kind of compressed decision-making and execution that characterized successful small unit operations. As they watched, the team synchronized their assault on 3 different entry points. Flashbang grenades created confusion while precision fire eliminated specific threats. Within 70 seconds, they had secured all hostages and neutralized the opposing force without casualties. Better, Williams commented. They're starting to understand that this isn't about being heroes. It's about being smarter than the enemy. Sarah smiled at the comment. That had been one of the hardest lessons for her to learn as well. Media accounts of her operation often emphasized the dramatic firefight and exceptional marksmanship. The real innovation had been tactical, identifying enemy assumptions and exploiting them systematically. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Washington. Another high-priority target had been identified, this time in Syria. The conventional approach would require weeks of planning and substantial international coordination. Higher headquarters wanted to know if the Chun Institute could provide an alternative assessment. How quickly can we put together a mission analysis team? She asked Williams. 6 hours for preliminary assessment. 24 hours for detailed planning if we proceed to that stage. Do it. And include representatives from our international partners. This might be an opportunity to test some of the new multilateral concepts we've been developing. The Syrian operation would represent the next evolution of small unit tactics. Instead of a single national team, they were experimenting with international special operations units trained in compatible methods. A British SAS operator might lead a team that included American Delta Force, German KSK, and Israeli Sayeret personnel, all trained in the same tactical concepts and operating procedures. Political considerations made such operations complex, but the tactical advantages were significant. Different national specialties could be combined in ways that exceeded the capabilities of any single unit. British maritime expertise, American aviation support, German engineering capabilities, Israeli intelligence methods. Properly integrated, these strengths created possibilities that no single nation could achieve independently. 3 days later, Sarah found herself in a secure conference room at the Pentagon, briefing senior officials on options for the Syrian operation. The target was a chemical weapons expert whose knowledge and materials posed an imminent threat to civilian populations across the Middle East. Colonel Chun, the Secretary of Defense, began, "I want your honest assessment. Can your methods work against this target?" Sarah had spent 36 hours studying the intelligence reports, satellite imagery, and tactical assessments. The target compound was more sophisticated than anything they had previously encountered, with multiple layers of security and early warning systems that would detect conventional assault forces long before they could reach their objective. "Yes, sir, but with significant modifications to our standard approach," she replied. "The enemy has learned from previous operations. They're specifically prepared for small unit infiltration attempts." "What kind of modifications?" "We would need to approach this as a deception operation rather than a direct assault. Make them believe they're facing a conventional threat while the actual assault team approaches from an unexpected vector." General Morrison, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, leaned forward in his chair. "Explain how that would work." Sarah moved to the large display screen and began outlining her concept. Simultaneous operations at multiple scales. A conventional force conducts a feint attack from the obvious approach route, drawing attention and defensive resources. Meanwhile, the actual assault team infiltrates from a completely different direction using techniques the enemy won't be expecting. How large a conventional force? Company-sized element, approximately 120 personnel. Large enough to appear threatening, but small enough to be politically acceptable if the operation becomes public. The Secretary of Defense studied the proposed timeline. 36 hours from authorization to execution. That's faster than we've ever attempted for an operation this complex. Speed is essential, sir. The longer we take to plan, the more time the enemy has to relocate or enhance their defenses. Our intelligence suggests they change locations every 48 to 72 hours. What followed was 3 hours of detailed operational planning that would have been impossible 5 years earlier. The concept Sarah had developed during the Nasir operation had evolved into a sophisticated framework for rapid response special operations. Intelligence fusion, planning acceleration, equipment pre-positioning, and international coordination had all been streamlined to enable the kind of compressed timelines that made these operations feasible. 2 days later, Sarah stood in the operations center watching satellite feeds as her concept was executed halfway around the world. The conventional force was conducting their feigned attack exactly as planned, drawing Syrian government forces and local militia units toward defensive positions that protected against traditional assault routes. Meanwhile, a six-person international team was approaching the actual target from the north, using a route that intelligence assessments had dismissed as impassable for military forces. Advanced climbing equipment and specialized training made the impossible approach not just feasible, but optimal. Team 1 is in position, came the report from the field commander. Like Sarah 5 years earlier, he was leading a small unit against overwhelming odds in pursuit of a strategic objective that conventional forces couldn't achieve. Team 2 has reached Overwatch position, reported the sniper team that would provide supporting fire during the extraction phase. Faint force is fully engaged. Enemy attention is focused on the southern approach. Sarah watched the synchronized operations with professional admiration and personal anxiety. She had developed the concepts, but other people were now risking their lives to execute them. The responsibility was overwhelming. Go for assault, came the authorization from the operation commander. On the satellite feed, Sarah could see the assault team moving through the target compound with the same speed and precision that had characterized her operation against Nasir. But this time the stakes were higher. Chemical weapons materials in the wrong hands could kill thousands of civilians. Failure could trigger regional conflict or terrorist attacks on an unprecedented scale. Package secured, came the report after 8 minutes of radio silence. Moving to extraction. The withdrawal proceeded flawlessly, with the assault team reaching their helicopter pickup point while the conventional force maintained their diversionary pressure. By the time Syrian forces realized they had been deceived, the actual assault team was already crossing into international airspace. Mission complete, came the final report. High-value target and materials secured without casualties. Sarah felt the familiar mixture of relief and professional satisfaction that followed successful operations. But more than personal validation, this mission demonstrated that the concepts she had pioneered were scalable and repeatable. Other teams, operating in different environments against different threats, could achieve similar results using principles derived from that night in Afghanistan. In the weeks that followed, analysis of the Syrian operation would generate new insights and refinements to small unit tactical doctrine. Each successful mission provided lessons that improved future operations, while each failure identified limitations that required additional innovation. The process was never-ending. As tactics evolved, so did countermeasures. As countermeasures developed, so did countermeasures. Warfare was fundamentally an intellectual arms race between innovation and adaptation, with each side constantly seeking advantages over the other. Sarah's contribution to that race had been proving that small, highly trained teams could accomplish objectives that previously required much larger forces. But she understood that her tactical innovations were only temporary advantages in an ongoing struggle between opposing military philosophies. The real legacy of the Nasir operation wasn't the specific techniques that made it successful. Those had already been superseded by more advanced methods developed by subsequent teams. The real legacy was demonstrating that conventional wisdom was often simply untested assumptions waiting to be challenged by creative thinking and professional competence. Standing in the operations center after another successful mission, Sarah reflected on how military doctrine evolved. Today's innovations became tomorrow's standard procedures, which eventually became obsolete methods that needed to be replaced by new innovations. The cycle continued indefinitely, driven by the fundamental human tendency to solve problems through creative application of available resources. Her phone buzzed with a message from the Secretary of Defense. Congratulations on another successful operation. When can we discuss the next evolution of these capabilities? Sarah smiled as she typed her response. The next evolution is already in development, sir. We just don't know what it looks like yet. Innovation never stopped. The moment you thought you had perfected a method was the moment your enemies began developing countermeasures. Success in warfare required constant adaptation, endless learning, and the humility to recognize that today's breakthrough would be tomorrow's historical footnote. But for 90 seconds on a mountainside in Afghanistan, for soldiers had proven that the impossible was often just another word for untested. That lesson would echo through military academies and operational planning centers for decades to come, inspiring new generations of warriors to challenge assumptions and push the boundaries of what small units could accomplish. The legend had become doctrine. The doctrine had become capability. And the capability continued to evolve, ensuring that somewhere in the world, small teams of exceptional individuals were proving that courage, skill, and innovative thinking could overcome odds that conventional wisdom said were insurmountable. The story would be told and retold, growing in the telling, but always returning to its essential truth. When someone says that's impossible, sometimes the best response is simply to prove them wrong.